Hello and welcome back to the Kerbal Space Program. Today we're just going to be continuing with what we're doing. We got into space last time, so this time we're going to work on getting to orbit, and to say the least, it's far more successful than last time. So, just design a basic spacecraft. I sort of follow, especially early on, a pretty basic system using a single liquid-fueled central core with 4 SRBs around the side. Typically using universal storage, I can get a number of science instruments in there as well. But this is just a pretty basic design not for much more than just getting into orbit. But once we're in orbit, we can do all sorts of science and eventually get the parts to go even further. So it's effective for what it needs to do. So this is where I start using the gimbaled engines almost alone, because we don't yet have the proper fins, and I believe shortly afterwards I go back and I unlock the fins to make it easier to design this spacecraft. But I use these SRBs to give it that small boost that later on will provide good boost for better stages, but it's necessary for now to at least get some stability and things. And so I use these winglets for now. They're larger, and then I believe I use smaller winglets on the top as well to maintain stability with the upper stages, but I end up changing the entire scale of this whole rocket just a bit to make sure that it works. And part of that includes thrust limiting. I always thrust limit my SRBs on these kinds of things, typically to about 50. It gives enough to at least give a good thrust-to-weight ratio at launch, but afterwards it's unnecessary, so it's better to have that fuel for long periods of time rather than completely lose all of it to drag. So there I add a bit more fuel to the upper stage, and I believe this is where I remember that I actually need to put in science experiments. That's right. So what I do is I use universal storage quite extensively. It's a very useful mod, and I enjoy using it. And so I didn't have enough parts to do that. So I had to upgrade the launch pad, or I didn't have enough mass clearance. So I upgraded the launch pad so that I can use this spacecraft alone. And then I added in a few extra parts for the sake of getting more science in. So we have a I'm gonna mess around with other things for a while before I recognize that, wait, I've got universal storage. But universal storage is very useful. It's by far my favorite way to carry life support and science experiments, because you can get so much in such a small, compact space. It's great for probes, especially smaller ones that you just need to get a few D-magic parts out to different places, because you can fit 4 experiments on one set. It's really good. And once you actually get to the parts where it combines the thermometer and barometer into one piece, that is an incredible savings of space, because 1 part free is good, especially in the early game. Granted, you're using a part to put as a core, but beyond that, it's actually not all that much, and that core works for a whole lot more than just that one. Plus, it's all very aerodynamic and not likely to burn off during re-entry. So, the craft is pretty well designed at this point, and I believe I go back and no, I don't change the pilot here, but I decide not to go for most of the science on the launch pad, because although there is some science to gain, it's not really worth the effort. I at least check what it is, but I'd rather use the experiments on things that I cannot get later. So, yeah. And everything's set up, and so launch begins, and it's fairly smooth the whole time. I turn a bit early, possibly, I don't remember exactly. It's a bit of a fiddly gravity turn. But it all works fine. I wish I had the R8 winglets right now, because those are far more useful. But as is, it's not an option, so I'll go without them. And just grabbing a bit of science as I go up, using some of the experiments that are free. The SRBs are out, and now the main engine I power back up. I really should have set it up so that I started the engine before I forgot the SRBs, but yeah, it's sort of an obvious problem. I'll work on it, hopefully. I'll get better at the game, maybe, probably not. And the entire mission goes very smoothly. It's very few problems, and overall it's far more successful than the early NASA launches, to say one thing. It does get me quite a bit of science, and because of the number of missions that I'm also working towards, it gives quite a bit of money. And this puts me in a good position for a later game. So, I say later game, I mean like the next 4 missions or at most, but soon enough we're going to be moving into setting up all sorts of orbital stuff, and having the money to launch multiple spacecraft and be able to afford some failures is good. So, as usual, launches can be fairly boring. Just more science, and more science, and more science, over and over. But it works fine. The whole thing is great, and nothing particularly goes wrong. Now, of course, I don't yet have patched conics, but that's not much of an issue because this is just an orbital mission. I'm not trying to go to the moon. Although that will be coming soon, but I'd like to make sure that everything is set up in Kerbin orbit first. So, of course, we have remote tech in this. And it's going to be important to get a remote tech network set up. I've previously used a slight variation on this kind of design. I use a slightly heavier SRB and I believe a slightly stronger engine to be able to launch the satellites. And it works quite well. It's just 4 launches. They're fairly cheap, so I can do it and still make income off of the remote tech contract. So I'll probably do that as soon as I get that contract. Although it depends on how much I actually have at the time and if I can afford it to actually get the final thing. And yeah, I guess there's not much else to say there, but I'm just gonna keep talking because that's what I'm here to do. So, the entire flight goes fine. Orbit is achieved with little issues, and of course, Jebediah gets plenty of well-earned experience. We get some nice resources out of it, but most importantly, we get science that moves us closer to getting better parts. So, the orbit's fairly smooth. I keep saying fairly smooth. I really should stop. But, you know, I don't have much else to say right now, so why not? What's the word I'm looking for? As we get closer to actually sustaining orbit, we get all sorts of contracts and records and stuff, and it gets us everything we need to, you know, get more money. And yeah. Simple mission, really simple. I'll probably fast forward some of this. But who knows, I might not. I might leave you here listening to my horrible, pointless discussions about pointless things. Actually, on an actually important note, I really don't like the name I have for this series. I was sort of rushed to come up with a name, and I threw down a random, really bad name. So, looking for a better name, any suggestions would be appreciated, but Colonize Kerbol is kind of a boring name, and it's probably the best way to explain the goal of this series. So, names, yes, names are appreciated, and I believe I've fixed the audio. If I haven't, I will probably throw in an annotation in there to remind myself that I am a failure, but that's a minor detail. Yeah, I can deal with it. So of course, the basic pod I'm using now is just the one-man pod, because that's all I've got. I believe I've unlocked the satellites and the plane pod, or the plane capsule, but I won't be using the plane capsule for a while. And satellites, I can use the satellite pod. Yeah, here I've made it into orbit, so I'm just deorbiting. Now, unfortunately, I forgot to increase PlanetShine ambient light before I started recording, so at the time, I didn't exactly recognize that it was so dark. But yeah, it's nearly impossible to see what's going on, and I try, of course, as usual, to return with every part I can, because apparently I think that's a smart idea. I end up, of course, ignoring that idea and discarding the fuel tank and engine, because as it is, I am aerodynamically unstable. I believe I'm running deadly reentry, so it's more dangerous. If I had stock aerodynamics, I could survive this, but this isn't stock aerodynamics, so it's not exactly viable. And as you can see, everything starts just becoming pitch black. I apologize. I'll make sure that it's fixed before I start recording in future episodes. This is also a note to myself. Now, I do fix it at some point, and you'll see it, no doubt. I'll probably mention it. Woohoo, because I'm very, very professional that way. And the entry, as with everything else here, is pretty smooth. There's a few heat gauges popping up every now and then. Luckily, heat gauge memory leak is fixed, no need to worry about that. But yeah, it's all being managed by the heat shield. There's just a few of the universal storage parts being a bit fiddly about their heat and everything. So, everything works fine. And this is the last time you'll see this spacecraft before I change the settings. Now, at this point I don't have much in terms of long-term life support, and I'm not going to launch satellites or run a lunar mission until I have at least solar panels. I can launch satellites of solar panels. Granted, I can launch them without, and use the fact that the batteries won't tick down while they're in, orbit, and I'm not using them as an active vessel. But that seems a bit cheaty, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to at least have some solar panels. I will be going to save file editing and giving them perfect orbits, because I really don't want to deal with aligning them constantly to keep them from going out of orbit and out of sync and everything. That's just not fun. And there's the PlanetShine setting change. You can see as my mouse moved over the PlanetShine button in the toolbar that's really, really big and probably about to get way too big for its space. And you can actually see things now, hopefully, although YouTube compression may have killed it all. I'll probably increase it even more eventually. So yeah, this entire mission, very smooth. Little is lost in the whole thing, and in fact, I believe I only get good results from it. Lots of science that I then use to get plenty of parts. And Jebediah is fairly happy about his completion of this mission within acceptable parameters. And eventually I'll hit the ground. There we go. So I just grab a bit more science because I can. I have some mystery goose slots open and I can get some crew reports, and it's all well and good and plenty of stuff. And in this case, I won't fall into the bottom of the ocean. Because I'm, on land. Yeah. So I just grab every EVA report I can and re-enter the craft. Right, Jebediah? Right, Jebediah? Yes, I re-enter the craft and recover the vessel after grabbing more science. Because that's what I do. And recovering the vessel. So I get ribbons, of course. Final Frontier, really fun mod. Doesn't do much, but I enjoy having the ribbons to be like, this is what this one person did. I believe he got a G-Force ribbon and first Kerbol in orbit for that one. I can barely see because this preview is in horrible resolution. Now, here I look through the stuff I can get. I really want flight control because the AVR8s are incredibly useful, so I grab that. And then I'm sort of torn between the remaining ones. General construction provides some good science parts. Avionics, has obvious uses. Science, basic science, I believe I end up using purely for the magnetometer boom. Just because it's that extra science, but it might also be for a number of other reasons, I don't remember. Again, I'm barely able to see what this text says. So, there's universal storage magnetometer boom there. And, of course, I use universal storage a ton. And enhanced survivability will be useful later. But right now, I don't have enough parts to spare for an escape pod. So I might give the Mooner missions an escape pod if I have the part space. I get basic science, and I can't read these numbers. I can't tell you if I had enough science to get anything else. But I don't believe I did. Although the fact that I'm checking now may mean that I did, and I'm just being silly. I don't know. And, of course, flight control gives me the Reflectron, so I didn't get anything else. So I can actually do probe launches now. But I won't. I grabbed a few extra contracts, and I want to get... And one of the things I had to do was something with magnetometers. I don't remember the exact contract. I recorded this about a week ago and couldn't actually do any audio stuff because I was incredibly busy with other things that took up all my time. But that hopefully won't be a problem in the future. I've got it done now so I can actually start doing audio stuff more often and possibly do something other than just post commentary. I bet everyone's excited to hear something other than me being completely confused about what I did in the past. I think that's a great idea. We should do more of that stuff where we're not uncertain of what's going on. So I decided to hide it in here to sort of like reduce its profile compared to the rest of the craft. I think it looks great. It like extends out like that, like some sort of really, really big antenna. I like the look of it, I really do. Probably no one else does, but I do. So it's a nice compact thing that like shoots out from the pod and probably gets in everyone's way and they're like stabbing their backs on the magnetometer boom and like hating all the engineers who designed the craft, which of course is only me. And I look at the ScanSat thing because, well, eventually I'll be launching a ScanSat mission to scan Kerbin. I believe I accepted that mission as well, but didn't start it because I didn't want to do it yet. Now, I have access to a bunch of radiators now, or at least the starting radiators, and eventually we'll get more with near future electrical. I wish heat control was updated, because that is an incredible mod. I'll actually check if it's updated before I start the next recording session. That's the word I was looking for. I'm great with words, in case you can't tell. Obviously the most experienced Englishman. And by Englishman, I mean person who speaks English, not person from England, in all of history, but, you know, Hemingway has nothing on me. So, this mission is, as with the previous one, fairly smooth, and this is only going to be 2 missions this time, because they're both fairly short, but not as filled with failures as the first launches. You'll notice as we get further into the game, I get better at it, and then I slowly lose it as I start trying to go to other planets, and my incompetence shows more and more, because I am an incompetent individual. And again, I'm silly and don't actually stage properly, but you see there that I actually had it on full thrust, and I had the liquid-fueled engine on a separate stage. That's what I usually do, I just was too silly to bother with it the first time. And that, okay, with this low resolution of this preview, the parachute button looks like some sort of weird camera. Like it's like a security camera or something that's on some weird like L-shaped support thing. It's really interesting. I'm sure no one on YouTube will see that because my editing software does previews in far worse resolution than YouTube does. So, again, smooth mission. This one has a bit more of an interesting end. I'll say that for now and let you see when we actually get to it. And I only figured out the problem after I had landed, and it was hilarious. But I just run a bit more science, and the main goal here is that magnetometer boom. I'm almost certain it was a mission to get a magnetometer boom thing from near Kerbin orbit. And the first stage is out, so we switch to the second stage, go into orbital mapping, and prepare to go into the proper orbital setting and all that stuff. I'm using words. And when that's done, it's very
simple task. I mean, orbit, once you get used to it, isn't that difficult. I used FAR for a while, and I believe I'm still using it, new FAR, but I got used to the gravity turns for a while, and, well, I mean, everyone who used FAR got used to the gravity turns. I will warn, I'm not good with FAR aircraft. And at some point, I'm going to try and make an aircraft. And it's going to be a disaster. And I know this. So before everyone says, you're really bad at making aircraft with FAR, yeah, I know. It's going to be bad. Now, I only need to get the science from orbit, from space, but I decide, no, there's no reason not to go to orbit for this mission. I mean, there is. It's shorter to not go to orbit, but I decide, you know what, I'll go to orbit. And, as with the previous ones, it is successful. I do a bit of a slightly asymmetrical, or not entirely retrograde, or prograde. I do a not entirely prograde burn to try and move the apoapsis closer to me and away from me and all that fun stuff that has to do with orbit. And it's, again, a clean mission. I believe I had actually initially launched it with, without a few changes, and with Jebediah in the pilot seat, and then decided, you know, maybe I should switch out people. It's still too early for me to be comfortable with sending up, someone who's not a pilot. So I sent up Valentina instead of Bill or Bob, because they're, having the SAS at this point is very useful. I will only send up an engineer or scientist either with a pilot, or once I actually have probes with SAS, they can be the command that, and then just use the SAS of the probe while using local control. Because I really don't want to deal with not having SAS, especially with the designs that I have to build my rockets with right now. It's very fiddly. I could launch it, certainly. I'm going to do launches like that when I start launching the probes, because I'll probably be using, say, Sputnik probe modules. Here I decide to not be stupid and drop the engine before I start re-entering the atmosphere, because I already know I am not going to save the engine. It is dead. It will burn in the atmosphere. It will not survive. I don't want to waste the safety of all the science I've got for a random piece of hardware that's really not all that valuable. I mean, it is, compared to most of a craft, but otherwise it's fine. And there was me trying to move the spacecraft at 4 times normal speed, not remembering that I was at 4 times normal speed. I'm good at that. I'm good at remembering things. It's a skill I have a plethora of. So deceleration burns start, and I believe that was the explosion of the engine. And there's the fuel tank. I bet that was what everyone was waiting for. Their destruction. And again, heat gauges being a bit fiddly because... Thank you. Being a bit fiddly because of the whole... And there I go, trying to reorient myself again while at 4 times normal speed. Now, as this goes on, the whole re-entry goes fine. And everything remains in one piece despite the huge number of temperature gauges there. Nothing is actually damaged, and it's all good. We get the science out, and we get all sorts of money and science, and we can get new parts, and all that fun stuff that comes with science. I'll just keep saying the word science. However, where it gets interesting is after the re-entry. And it's just a bit with the game acting a bit silly because of how it models aerodynamics and all the atmosphere stuff, and it's fun. It's very fun. I turn off stage only so I can actually see my ablative shielding because it doesn't count it as a stage, I don't believe. Although again, I can't read that resource bar because this is probably in 12p. And yeah, simple re-entry. You've seen it a million times, I'm sure, if you watch Kerbal Space Program. If you don't, maybe this is your 3rd or 4th re-entry you've ever seen, in which case, welcome to Kerbal Space Program. Buy it. Now, This whole re-entry, again, I keep saying the same things. I apologize. I'm horrible with words. In case you haven't figured that out, my English skills are not that good. And I get a bit worried because all of a sudden some of the temperature gauges are getting inordinately high. But nothing goes wrong. Nothing possibly goes wrong. And it starts to die down. You can tell by the sound. I'm very helpful. And it just sort of drops and drops and drops and drops. And there we go. Velocity starts to drop below supersonic speeds. I believe I bring up the far menu to check Mach speeds, because I don't want to deploy my parachute while I'm at Mach. Because that's a bad idea. Don't do it. There you go. And I might even wait further past it. I don't remember. Oof. I need to start doing post-commentary closer to when I actually record. That would be a good idea, wouldn't you agree? I'm sure you would agree. And I might not even do the in-game commentary. Who knows? I'll see. It all depends. Maybe it'll end up being a great idea and I'll do it over and over and over and have in-game commentary and post-commentary in a mix, and then I'll have someone else running in and commenting randomly on what I'm doing and insulting me. Maybe it'll be Scott Manley. No. So this is where it starts being weird. You'll notice that the parachute is actually going at a right angle to my craft. And my velocity vector has just reversed. As my craft keeps turning, my parachute keeps turning against it. I am not hanging directly underneath my parachute. Something is moving me. This has me quite perplexed, as you can tell by my slightly frantic moving of the screen. So, the parachute is at an angle, I say as I move my hands to point as if you see what's going on, and it's causing me to move around a bunch, really strangely. And I don't know what's going on. It's really confusing. I'm at an angle, my velocity vector is being really weird. So I just sort of go with what's going on. And at some point, I may not see it, you may see it. Yeah, it's still going a bit weird. And it's really quite mysterious. And there are phantom forces involved, to give you all a hint. I'm sure you can go betting in the comments, all two of you. And try and figure out what the problem is before I say it. So I'll give you a few seconds. And then the betting will be off. But yeah, my parachute is at a strange angle, my velocity vector is acting weird, but my craft isn't recognizing the fact that that's happening, and is just doing what it's been doing. And so I increased the warp speed, yes, warp 5, everyone, and just keep dropping, and I'm looking at the radar altitude. I use that a decent amount. That's the only reason I really go internal, unless I really enjoy piloting from the interior view. And I believe this is near where the reasoning is shown for why this problem is going on. And it'll happen any moment now. Come on, game. Or video, or recording, or whatever I want to call it. And the parachute should deploy in a moment. There we go. And now, the problem... There we go. The heat shield was stuck to my craft, and it was exerting aerodynamic forces on my craft as I was re-entering the atmosphere. Well, as I was deploying my parachute. But what happened was, when I staged my parachute with when I staged my parachute, it also ejected my heat shield. But it didn't eject enough, and it just sort of it stuck onto my craft, and while my parachute was slowing me down, it was changing my velocity vector, but keeping me upright. It was having me skid to the side, giving me quite a bit of side slip. And as that was happening, my parachute tried to go in my retrograde vector, because that's its job, that's what it's supposed to do. But it wasn't slowing me down, because it wasn't connected, so to speak, with the heat shield,
and the heat shield was trying to skate away, and there's the heat shield hitting the ground. It was trying to slide to the side and get away, but I was attached to it, so I was flying on my heat shield. My heat shield became a flying saucer. So, that was one of the most interesting things I've seen in this game, and I suppose that's a sign that I haven't played much. But it was quite fun. It was quite fun to watch what was happening and be really confused by the whole thing. I grab a bit of science to get more science. English, my best skill. I will say that many times. And, well, a decent amount of science from this mission. I believe it wasn't that much in the end. Again, I can't read these numbers. I'll just write down numbers on post-it notes and put them on my screen so I can see what it says. And I believe I checked to see if I can get more science, and I end up getting one more, and I believe it is the general construction tree, but I look at aviation a bit. Landing gear, I'm not sure if they fixed the landing gear. And I'm hesitant to use it, knowing that the landing gear wasn't good in 1.0.2. And it wasn't good because I designed an entire aircraft that worked fine, and then it would hit the ground, not slow down, and crash and die. That's not good landing gear. I can't use a plane if I can't land it. So I need air brakes or, good landing gear like in the landing tree. So I'll work towards that. But what I really look at is advanced construction. I want advanced construction. It's got all sorts of universal storage parts, and all sorts of construction parts. Also, getting general construction gives me access to the next level of flight research, which gives me things like, delta wings, I believe air brakes, and better intakes. Basically everything I need to design actually usable aircraft. So, I end up not going for aviation, because aviation, although it provides me with a jet engine, it also gives me really bad landing gear, and I don't have a use for it if I don't have landing gear yet, so I skip it. I don't have enough, I don't believe, for another research, although I might, and I might just be, again, unable to read anything. But yeah, I don't have enough, and I go in and upgrade the astronaut complex because I want to actually get more astronauts and Kerbonauts or whatever they're called, and to get EVAs in space. Because, as we all know, or most of us hopefully, possibly, maybe know, but probably not if you haven't played this game before, orbital EVA is very useful. You get one for each biome on Kerbin. It's incredibly good. I grab a pilot and I believe an engineer, and I just look at the other ones. I don't think I buy any more upgrades. But yeah, that'll be all for now. I go into the mission control and check some stuff, but otherwise, next time we'll be doing more science in orbit, possibly working towards setting up a probe network. I don't know, depends on if I get electrics. But until then, goodbye.